This is Denise Chavez on Beyond Ordinary News Radio, reporting on probably the most important issue in the history of modern man. My guest today is Planet X researcher author Marshall Masters, who will be speaking on the topic of the upcoming interaction between the Nibiru system and our sun, that is, the point of perihelion. Marshall Masters is an author, publisher, media guest, internet radio show host, and founder of Your Own World Books. He is a former CNN Science features news producer and United States Army Public Information Officer, and he founded YOWUSA.com in 1999. Marshall began writing on the topic of Planet X in 2002. He has also produced several popular YouTube videos, and his YOW Books YouTube channel has received over 17 million views to date. His published works include Being in It for the Species, Crossing the Cusp, Planet X Forecast and 2012 Survival Guide, 2012 Wisdom of the Elohim, and God's Child Covenant, Return of Nibiru. Following years of intensive research and publishing efforts, Marshall now views Planet X as a clear and present danger. His research findings tell us that the single greatest cause of death during this coming tribulation will be disease. For this reason, his mission has changed, and he is now devoting his research and publishing efforts in the field of survival wellness advocacy. He states that this is because while you can run away from a tsunami, a virus will follow you wherever you go. My listeners can find me on www.facebook.com/Denise.Chavez333, darkskywatcher.com, and on YouTube channel Dark Skywatcher 74. Now, please welcome Mr. Marshall Masters. Marshall Masters, welcome to Beyond Ordinary News Radio.
Denise, it's a pleasure to be here.
I just recently watched your video entitled Planet X System Update Number 1 and decided that that is pretty much what I wanted to focus on because there's so much that is being said and pretty much not said. Kind of have to read between the lines.
Oh, yeah. You got it there.
Yeah, so in fact, I'd like to say right now to our listeners that, I'd like to advise that they watch this video a couple of times so that they can understand it fully.
There's a lot of information.
Okay, so, in the video you address the question as to why it is we cannot see the system behind us each year as we do in front of us near the sun. And in doing so, you're plotting the movement of Nemesis on the ecliptic, Nemesis being the dwarf star located at the center of the Planet X system. Now, based on your observations from 2010 to 2013, at approximately 11 minutes and 40 seconds into the video, I noticed that there was a difference in the way that the system moved. Between 3 years, it moved a given distance, but then it took only 1 year to move sort of exponentially, and I'm wondering if you can explain how that happened.
Well, the orbital speed is varying, and this is a long period orbit, and a good way to think of it is, when you go to a amusement park, and there's that ride that's called the Whip, and it's got those two big turnbuckles on one end, and they whip you around. And then for the rest of the time, when you're going from one turnbuckle to the next, it just kind of plods along slowly, and you've got to pretend to be interested. But then there's that whoo when you whip around. And that's the reason why they call that ride the Whip. Well, the same kind of thing is happening right now in the orbit. And it's coming out of an orbit that is inclined to our ecliptic by about 30 degrees, and it's been coming in hot on its perihelion leg of its orbit. But then, as it needs to make the turn to go to its aphelion leg, which takes it away from the sun, out back into the depths of our system, it is going to slow down. But once it reaches this point of perihelion, it's all of a sudden going to put the pedal to the metal and start speeding up again. So you have a lot of varying speeds as you go through. And that's the reason why it's not following what people would expect to see, which is kind of a linear thing. In other words, it's always a constant speed. It's not. That's the reason why it's moving at these different paces. Also because it's inclined And we're orbiting the sun every 365 days, and while it is bobbing up and down, it's orbiting the sun every 380 days. So this is really a lot of complicated movement. And as I show in the video, we tend to think of planets moving like freight trains. You got the tracks and you know where they're going. But this system really does not move like a freight train. It's not that predictable. It's more like a small airplane bouncing around in the sky. And that's a more accurate description of it. So it moves unlike anything else we have ever seen.
Okay, so in looking at these estimates, your observations, of course, of where the dark star will be at the end of this year, it's basically right behind the sun, yes?
Correct. And it's gone up behind the sun now. From our point of view on Earth, it's been coming up. And interestingly enough, years ago, we were looking for an acid test. And there was a polar probe that was going around the sun. NASA operated it. And what they found was that the sun was more active in its southern hemisphere than it is in its northern hemisphere, and out in a direction that is consistent with the observations that we've made. And so that probe, the data that NASA provided, is consistent with the observations we've seen in terms of the direction of travel of the Planet X system with Nemesis at its core. And right now it's slipped up behind the sun, and it's in probably, I guess, we would say the 8 o'clock position, but behind the sun, moving up towards its 2 o'clock position. Kitty corner behind the sun is our planet is closing with it. Remember, it's orbiting the sun every 380 days, meanwhile going up and down and moving on multiple axes. We're orbiting every 365 days. So we're coming up from behind. It's like a horse race, and there we are coming up on the outside, getting to that final stretch. And we have that motion, but also the system is coming up from behind the sun relative to our view of it. And what we will see is next year, it'll start coming out from behind the sun.
Right, yes. So it really doesn't take a rocket scientist to deduce that the system will complete perihelion in 2015 sometime.
2015 could be 2016. The thing here is that, again, it moves unlike anything else we've seen. And we got this not only from the guides when we were doing Being in It for the Species. And the book is, as I point out in the video, I'm just a messenger. This is channeled messages.
Okay.
And what I would say to your listeners is that, what the guides tell us to tell you is that these are projections based on a current timeline. Okay. They don't want me to call them prophecies or prediction. But whether it's a projection, a prophecy, a prediction, a forecast, here's the rule. Be mindful of it, but do not live in expectation of it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, now are these guides the Anunnaki?
No. These guides were all, in their previous incarnations on Earth, astronomers.
I see, okay. Now, I'm wondering if you can go into how the powers that be are able to conceal a lot of things just by telling us stuff about Venus.
Well, as we pointed out, we have these really stellar images that came in from buoys. And one big problem a lot of people have with observations is the chemtrail spraying is so much heavier than folks can imagine. And so consequently, it's a hit or miss prospect for this because we're looking at objects that are near the sun. And consequently, you can only see them just before sunrise or just before sunset. And views to the east, which is what we have with the buoys, are quite remarkable because they were the most difficult to vet. On the other hand, in the afternoons, this is about the time when they've been doing their heavy spraying. So you're just not going to do it. Now, there are some people who say, well, they're doing it intentionally to block it. And I say maybe that's one of the factors. But principally, as we point out in the video, this is for weather modification and crowd control. And so there's chemicals in there that they're spraying that are altering our weather. We have been seeing for years global warming, global warming, global warming, but the recent trend is saying we have global cooling. And all of a sudden, what happened to our hurricane seasons? So there's a lot of weather modification going on. We point out a drought map for the western United States, and what's happening right now is they're moving the air currents so that they're shifting moisture to different parts of the country. Now, this last year, I moved up to Reno in February, and I made the decision that I was moving for two reasons. One was the weather modification, because I was sitting there in Santa Cruz on January 1st of this year in a tank top and shorts, walking through the surf up to my knees. I lived there for 18 years. And I can tell you, for 17 of those 18 years, I didn't do that. That was summertime. That was August. You waited for August to have that kind of fun. On January 1st, the beach would be cold and cloudy, and if you were there, you were dressed in a heavy leather jacket, a sweater, a scarf, gloves, all right, a wool cap, and you were carrying an umbrella. And there I was, August on January 1st. And I'm going, beautiful, but what's wrong with this picture? And then the other reason is what's happening with Fukushima, because Fukushima is killing the Pacific. And there's going to come a time, and it's not going to be far from now, when all up and down the West Coast, there are going to be radiation hazard signs. We saw them down in Los Angeles area where they said, don't go in the water, there's microbes, there's disease, you could get sick, so you couldn't fish, you couldn't do anything other than just enjoy the water and the views. And so the same thing is going to happen all along the coast. They'll have radiation warning signs, and they'll just tell people don't go in. So I wanted to get out of there, move to Reno, get inland, get some elevation. I felt it was that time. So there are an awful lot of earth changes going on, but the weather modification in particular is a persistent trend not only here in the western U.S., but up in Canada as well. Earlier this year, I had people calling me from British Columbia, and they were reporting in the areas that they live in, they would normally have 4 to 6 feet of snow. And this last winter, they had absolutely no snow, just occasional rain. Shallow wells are going dry, and the salmon runs are off by 75%. When I got here to Reno, what I found interesting is in Truckee, which is north of Lake Tahoe. And Truckee is right up there. It's not far from Donner Pass, and it's like British Columbia. They get 4, 5, 6 feet of snow in the winter. This last winter, no snow. Same thing as British Columbia, just occasional rain. So everyone is going, what happened to the winter? Well, that moisture has been pushed in direction of the Midwest, which we're now seeing all of this flooding, all right, and different weather situations, but a lot more moisture over there because that's where we're growing grain crops, and they need the water over there. So that was a conscious decision. And these things are happening. The weather modification is happening because our climate is changing, and to a certain extent, what we're doing with carbon is accelerating the process. But this is more larger events that are going on. Principally two things. Now, one of the things that surprised us is that the guides told us that there is a galactic superwave, which is principally the cause for what's happening with the planet now, with weather, increased seismicity, and volcanism. All right. There's at the core of the system, and there's Dr. Paul LaViolette, and he wrote a book, Earth Under Fire, and did a very, very good job of explaining the galactic superwave, which is just pounding us. It's a failed star at the center of the system. When we pass through the galactic rift, through the plane of the system, we get hammered. And we're going through a part of, what he pointed out is that we're going through a part of space where young, large suns will tend to go supernova more likely than anywhere else. So we have this that is happening, and then at the same time, we have the approach of the Planet X system. And now that it's gone behind the sun, one of the things that we're seeing is a really startling increase in the amount of solar activity, X flares and M class, and it's just a matter of time before a big one pops off and nails us. Then we're in deep kimchi. What'll happen is our power grid is going to go down globally. And from there, a whole string of failures. Our entire power grid is very, very vulnerable. There's things that they could do for about the price of a B-2 bomber that would protect our global power grid from getting shorted out by CMEs. With these big, huge super transformers that we have now. The electric companies didn't want to foot the bill, so they have gone out and published a report and said, no, everything's wonderful. We're just fine. It was like Fukushima on 310. On 311, it was a different story. And we catch one of these CMEs, then we're back to sundials for a while. It's going to be that bad. It's just going to take down the grid, and then after it takes down the grid, the really bad thing is that likewise, it's going to fry all of the power capability in all of these nuclear reactors we have around the world. And we're going to have hundreds of nuclear reactors having Fukushima-like events. So there's going to be a massive amount of radiation that comes out of it. And I think we really, watching the sun and being mindful of it is really important right now. But on the other hand, it really just looks like greed and corruption is setting us up for one heck of a bad fall.
Now, do you suppose that someone will use the grid takedowns as a story to cover up the days of darkness?
Well, the grid's going to go down before the days of darkness, definitely. The way the tribulation rolls out is that we're going to, from this point, we know that we are on the timeline when we have what we call the Winter of Ash event. And the Winter of Ash event is going to be a whole lot of volcanoes erupting in the Western Pacific. And I also have a video up on that, volcano update number 1, where I'm showing that we're seeing a lot of activity over there. We just had an eruption in Japan, 55 people died. Mount Cinnabung is going to be erupting for as long as we can imagine. They just say it's just going to keep erupting. And so this region is already seeing a tremendous amount of buildup, which the guides tell us is this is a byproduct. Principal causality of this is the galactic superwave. And the approach of Planet X is just exacerbating it somewhat. Once that happens, the Winter of Ash event is going to be one in which the loss of life is not going to be tremendous. It's going to have more political and economic consequences because you're going to have a lot of ash in the sky, which is going to close down air travel. Now, that is going to have a huge impact on what's called just-in-time manufacturing. And so you have countries like Japan and Korea and Taiwan, Hong Kong, and they are providing components to manufacturers worldwide on a just-in-time basis, which means they say, okay, we need X number of gizmos, and they make them up and put them on a jumbo jet and ship them over. Well, if the jumbo jets can't fly, you still have ocean, but that takes a month. Meanwhile, it's going to change a political balance of power in the region because America projects its force principally through air power, whether it's carrier-based or land-based long-range bombers. Well, jet engines and volcanic ash do not work well together. You know, reminds me of that great line with Sean Connery in Hunt for Red October. Don't shoot in the air. You know, some of these things don't react well to bullets.
Right.
And it's that kind of thing. It'll bring aircraft down. And so they're going to have to ground it. You know, think back to when that, I think a couple of years ago, was 2010, when that volcano in Iceland popped off. And by the way, we're watching Bardabunga, and it looks like it's going to really pop. That thing just keeps, you know, building and building and building. And so that is going to shift the balance of power in that region, provoke regional wars. The other thing that's going to have a direct consequence for Americans is that we don't have a resilient farm system in terms of who supplies our marketplace, because the major corporations' agribusiness has really done a very effective job of destroying family farming in the country as a whole. You know, we have maybe 15% of the farms that we used to have per capita at the end of World War II. And they've just been really crushing these people. And, of course, then you have guys like Monsanto forcing them to go to GMO. So the large agribusinesses are really going to make windfall profits here, because you're going to have huge amounts of ash in the air, which means agriculture in that region is going to be really impacted. And so what they're going to do in the United States is they'll plant from fence post to fence post, but they're going to ship a lot of that to where they can get more money for it. And so consequently, we're going to see spotty shelves and high prices here in the United States. That'll be a consequence of that. Then what we also point out in the video is when we go further down the timeline, there's going to be an impact event, and that'll be off of the western shores of Europe. And that is going to have a whole series of ramifications that is going to cause both the east and the west coast of the United States to really get hammered. Then as we, you know, when we move forward, you were mentioning the days of darkness. There's several other events that come into that. Before the days of darkness, we're going to have what we call a lurch day. And this is when the planets, multiple planets in the Planet X system, as they're coming through on the aphelion leg, are going to get a gravitational lock on the lithosphere of our planet. And when that happens, it doesn't matter what you can or cannot see in the sky. It is going to be a lurch that everyone on the planet's going to feel. And we're going to, you'd mentioned Venus. Venus is one of the things where there will be an impact. One of the moons of this system is going to strike Venus in its southern polar region. But when we have the days of darkness, this is when Nibiru, which is the largest planet in the Planet X system, passes directly between us and the sun. And when that happens, it's not going to be like an eclipse. It's going to be a block. That's it. It's just going to be so big that it's going to completely block our view of the sun, at which point it will be days of darkness. And then after that happens, then we will have the pole shift.
Okay, now, with regard to debunking and Venus, you do mention following or at least knowing the phases of Venus, because it really comes down to knowing the full and partial phases of Venus on the ecliptic in order to decipher whether the object is indeed Venus. Can you please go over that?
Yeah. As we point out in the video, a good thing for people to do is just go to Wikipedia and type in the search phrase, phases of Venus. And so as Venus is going around in its orbit around the sun, we're going to see, just like our moon, you know, where we have a crescent moon, and then you have a, you know, a full moon, and then same thing. It's where is that object relative to the sun, and how's it receiving its light? And in the images that we showed captured off these buoys, Venus is where it would have a crescent shape, and as opposed to having a full face, which means it's on the other side of the sun. And we've had times where we've gotten a lot of images from folks sending them in, and it was Venus, and it was on the opposite side of the sun, and it had a full face. So what we do with this is that we explain these phases of Venus, whether you're going to have a crescent view of the object or a full face view of the object, where you just simply see the complete circular object. In the case here, Venus is where you would see a crescent shape, but the objects we see have a full face. And so we explain it for people so that they can look at the pictures and decide for themselves. Because what debunkers will say is, well, Venus is in the field of view, which means if you're looking up at that region of sky, Venus is up there. All right? Very simplistic. And they'll say, if Venus is in that region of the sky, well, maybe the sky program that you're using is not so precise or whatever, so you got to give it the benefit of the doubt. And no. If you're looking at phases of Venus, there is no benefit of the doubt. But don't take my word for it. Go look at the images yourself and decide this for yourself.
Right. So basically the people concealing this information are relying on our general ignorance of basic principles, such as knowing the phases of Venus to carry on this censorship. And then also, they're also relying on current levels of political efficacy. What do I mean by political efficacy is that we rely too much on what is fed to us. I guess basically what I'm trying to say to our listeners is that become knowledgeable on all of this.
Yes, that's exactly the point. But, what makes it so easy for them is, let's be honest, people tend to cling to the bliss of their ignorance like jealous lovers. Mm-hmm. You give them a fraction of something to say, well, okay, I have nothing to pay attention to now, move along. They'll do just that. All right? Only a few people really see it. Only a few people come into awareness and start asking those hard questions for themselves and thinking for themselves. And so I've really, over the years, come to view people who are coming into awareness as actually getting a calling.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. Now, we talked a little bit about planes dropping from the sky, and I had considered this before, but in the context of magnetic pull. For example, the eventuality of a magnetic pull so great that planes would be dropping from the sky, leaving them unable to chemtrail. Do you see this happening at all?
Well, what I see is that we're going to have an awful lot of volcanism, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of ash in the sky. When that happens, the chemtrailing is largely going to stop, along with international air travel, particularly in the northern hemisphere, where it's going to become particularly spotty. And but once the guacamole starts to hit the fan, I mean, the chemtrailing is, that's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound,
Right, yes.
Not going to work.
So will there ever be a time where we can actually see the system without it having been blocked at all?
Oh, yes. There will come a time when everyone is going to be standing out in the street, looking up into the sky, along with their neighbors and their friends and family, and pointing upwards and pooping their collective pants. Yes.
Okay. So, in your video, you speak of changing your focus.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I started Yowza.com in 1999. And then in 2001, I started researching Planet X, and in January 2002, I published my first Planet X article. So I've been doing this for quite some time. And all that time, I've always reported on Planet X from a position of that it was a threshold risk. All right? This is how intelligence agencies operate. And, the old premise of if there's smoke, there's fire. Just how much smoke do you have? And if there's enough smoke, then, maybe it's time to start filling buckets. And I've always reported on Planet X pretty much that way. All right. But after putting up this particular video and all of the events and writing being in it for the species, it went from being a threshold issue to a clear and present danger. And once that happened, then, at that point, what more can I say? Polish the apple. The book that we've published, Being in It for the Species, lays out the tribulation timeline in precise detail. It's a roadmap to the future. We have 3 videos that substantiate what the guides told us, and we authored this book over the summer before these events started unfolding. And at this point, it's no longer, is it coming in our lifetime? All right? It's coming. Now it's, how do we get people through it? And so for the last few years, I've been working on health and wellness and spiritual issues with a survival focus, and doing Planet X at the same time. And it was much like having my feet in 2 canoes. Kind of hard to get upstream. And there comes a point where you got to put both feet in 1 canoe and paddle for all you're worth. And I looked at it, and, now that I got these videos out, now that I got the book out, now that it's a clear and present danger, my focus is on helping people survive. Specifically, the meek. Not meek as we use the modern definition, which is a bastardization. If you go to an etymological dictionary and look at the 12th century definition of meek when it was first coined, these are the people you want to know. These are the people you want to have as neighbors. These are the people you want to survive with. So, as the adage goes, the meek shall inherit the earth. I tend to think more is that the meek are, it's their destiny to inherit the earth, but it's not a guarantee. And for me, the most important thing now in helping the meek is looking at causes of death. Now, all kinds of sexy stuff to talk about. We could die from tsunamis and volcanic eruptions and tornadoes and all of these things. Well, there comes a point where we figure out that you can run away from a tsunami. People may be stupid, but they're not dumb. So then, what's really going to cause most of the death and dying during this tribulation, which is going to take about a decade? It's going to be disease. Because you can run away from a tsunami, but a virus is going to follow you wherever you go. And so the whole point of survival wellness advocacy, which is now my new mission, is keeping healthy survivors healthy. It's not about being a pretend doctor. Communities are going to have their doctors, and they're going to have gunsmiths and farmers and people from all different useful backgrounds. But as a survival wellness advocate, your principal role is to keep healthy people healthy using simple, easily available natural remedies. And this is something I'm doing principally because my largest audience for Yowza.com and the people who are coming into awareness tend to be between the ages of 45 to 65 of modest or moderate means. And so they do not have, $100,000, $200,000 to go out and dig bunkers and stockpile food for years.
Right.
So for them, really survival is saying, how do I make myself useful? All right. Now, the survival communities are going to be dominated by people in their 20s and 30s. They're going to be younger. And they're the ones that are going to be the largest group of people to survive this. The very young and the very old are going to suffer the worst, which has always been the case throughout history. But for these folks who become survival wellness advocates, you walk into a community and you sit down with them and say, I can help you from getting sick. because this is what I've been preparing for. So maybe someone in there says that they're a doctor, and they say, well, okay, how are you working with me? And a survival wellness advocate says, you deal with people in crisis. You got to get sick people well. And there's only so much of you to go around. If I'm keeping people out of crisis, then the ones that do go into crisis, you have more time and energy to devote to them and to their recovery. But likewise, you're going to have more time to go into your own little laboratory, create new medicines, make instruments, and train other people in your skills. So it makes more efficient use of your time. You don't wind up becoming thoroughly exhausted because you are inundated with people in crisis. And I'm keeping them out of crisis with simple primary modalities like pH management, essential oils, and survival breathing, these kind of things. And also, making sure that everyone has potable water and they follow good personal hygiene. And these are things that if you're, when I was a medic in the Army, that was a real strong principal role for me as a medic in the Army. I could go down and close down a chow line. If I thought that there was any bacteria in that food, any problem with it, I could say, that's it, stop serving. If I was out on a rifle range and I saw that people were didn't have their steel helmets, I could close down the range. So safety and health were really important. And I took that role model, if you will, of when I was a medic in the Army, and with that wellness emphasis, and I've just applied it to this. And so I'm creating a plan and to teach people, particularly those who are ages of 45 to 65, of modest or moderate means, and, they don't have the money to go out and prep. I mean, we hear all kinds of great ads about, well, $5,000 of this and $10,000 of that and $20,000 of this, and you're going to be good to go. The people I'm talking to don't have it. But more importantly, they're not interested in sitting down in a little bunker, huddled in like bunker bunnies and waiting for the sound of shovels scraping over their head.
Right.
All right.
Is it me, or does it just seem like a really bad idea to go deep underground during all of this stuff?
Well, there's going to come a time when you need to go to ground. All right. Won't be all the time during it. And I can definitely say that, during the period of days of darkness going into the pole shift, if you are not underground, you are the proverbial poodle in the microwave. You are going to get roasted on the surface. So you have to do that. But on the other hand, sitting underground for 2 years and waiting for the dust to settle, that's not going to play out. Mm-hmm. You're going to have your best chance of surviving is with a community of people, and you're diversifying. The most important thing you're going to need to do is find ways to, grow fresh vegetables. All right. Whether soybeans or whatever, potatoes, whatever you can grow. Because if you're living off canned goods and packaged goods, first off, you're looking at a very long period of tribulation. And secondly, these canned and packaged goods, all of it, whether it's organic or GMO, is going to have the same effect. It's going to make your body acidic. If you're acidic, you're going to impair your immune system. Mm-hmm. But likewise, another thing that I see that really, really bothers me a lot is that a lot of preppers, they have pictures of their caches, and you look at it, and they are just loaded with, these inexpensive GMO wheat products. Mm-hmm. This stuff is death food. Mm-hmm. It's death food. It's why we have celiac disease, irritable bowel syndrome. We have all of these crazy problems, people having chronic inflammation problems. I was talking to one doctor who treats these chronic problems. I said, what's the number one reason why people come to you for their chronic problems? He said, wheat, GMO wheat.
Interesting. That sounds like my case, too.
Yeah. And so people have stockpiled vast amounts of this, and it's death food. That's it. It's just death food. I tried it. I tried living on it. You know, it's now people can get fresh fruits and vegetables and vary the diet. They have fresh meats and things like that. And so you don't get the full impact of it. But I'll tell you what, you go get American-made spaghetti, all right, good old GMO Monsanto Frankenfood, and you eat nothing but that for a week, you are going to be miserable. Your digestion's going to go to hell in a handbasket. You're going to get fuzzy-brained. I mean, this food is like alien hell food to the body. Mm-hmm. Because it's got like 43 chromosomes. Mm-hmm. The wheat that, wheat really got popular with the Roman Empire. That's for all intents and purposes, Rome was built on grass seeds. And that's 17 chromosomes. Our bodies understand that stuff, even though it's only been a few thousand years. We're adapted. We understand it. It's natural. It's organic. GMO wheat is combining, they're taking genes from animals, mixing them with plants. Our bodies are looking at this stuff going, what in the hell is this? If you have a flock of geese and they're flying and they want to sit down and take a rest and feed, and you've got on one side of the road, you got an organic field, and on the other side, you got a GMO field, man, they won't go near the GMO. You got cattle that are eating, they'll go first for the organic, and they'll only eat the GMO if they're absolutely starving. Animals understand that this stuff is poison. So, one of the things I would say to preppers out there is, now's the time to go take all of these wheat products and throw them away if they're GMO. And go get yourself organic, not ground flour. Learn to grind your own flour, but like red winter wheat. If you're going to get ready-made pastas, buy stuff that's been imported from Italy. And you can get that at Costco, as a matter of fact. Not all that expensive. Now, Italy will not allow GMO. And so if it's Italian and it says organic, that's good. And I know because, I tested that. I tested that Italian organic pasta from Costco after I tested the American-made pastas. And I was able to function much better on that.
Absolutely. So I had one more question with regard to your video, the video at hand, Planet X System Update number 1. Mm-hmm. You offer some events on this timeline. I'm wondering if you can tell us the difference between covert visitations, the arrival of the Anunnaki, and the departure of the Anunnaki.
All right. The covert visitations, as I told you before, there's going to be an impact event in the Eastern Atlantic off the shores of Europe. And what's going to happen is that this is an asteroid that's going to come out of the inner core of our systems from somewhere between the orbits of Venus and Mercury. And it's going to be thrown out by the approach of the Planet X system, and it's going to be thrown into a trajectory that'll bring it into contact with the Earth. And what will happen is the Anunnaki will covertly visit world leaders and tell them and offer to, what the guides say is that they're going to make an offer to alter the course of that object, but that the offer is going to be refused because it's going to come with a very nasty price tag. And consequently, the impact will happen. So after the impact happens, then the Anunnaki arrive. And it is going to be shock and awe. And for everybody that's going, they're going to come bring love and enlightenment. No, that's not what the guides are saying. What the guides are telling us is that they're going to come like mafia. And they're going to want gold for their atmosphere, and they're going to want women for their breeding programs for a slave species on one of the other planets in their system. And principally, they're going to be looking for virile young women, virgins, who are blonde-haired and black-haired. So they're going to be going principally for Nordic and Ashkenazi women.
Interesting.
And I feel a great deal of sadness for these women and what they're going to be put through. They're already being selected, and when the time comes, they're just going to be harvested up. Gold right now. You have, for example, Germany is really getting angry because they can't get access to the gold they have in the Federal Reserve System. Well, that gold has all been, and they've been doing Ponzi schemes. When you have what's called bullion banks, and so you buy a bar of gold, and what they're doing is they're fractionalizing it so that they'll sell the same bar of gold to 10 different customers. And all of these Ponzi schemes are starting to really unfold. And I think that, one of the things that we're going to see is that the global finance system, which is horrifically inundated with debt. We have so much debt right now. I mean, the United States will never be able to pay off its debt. And I look at a generation of folks that have come out of school, $1 trillion in student loans. I mean, my God, what a curse on a generation. All of this is because these manipulations are taking place so this gold can be hoarded, collected, and put into repositories so that it can be given to the Anunnaki. Because when they come, they're going to come like the mafia looking for their vigorish. You don't pay, the boys are going to have a conversation with you. And it's not going to be pleasant. So when they do come, it will be shock and awe. And they're going to, obviously want to terrify us and shock us into submission so that we'll give them what they want. Then the Anunnaki will, after the impact on Venus of one of the moons of the system, the Planet X system, then that after that event, that's when the Anunnaki go back to Nibiru. Okay. Taking the women and the gold with them. They're going to take about 99% of all of the refined gold in the world.
Okay, now, at the end of your video, you sort of intimate that almost as if we actually had a choice in the matter of whether or not to go with the Anunnaki. Did I get that right?
Well, what we really have, what I say is that this is a survivable flyby. Now, what the guides tell us is that this will be the last survivable flyby. Now, look and see what's happening with modern astronomy today. It used to be the Big Bang. They were trying to figure out, is the universe going to keep expanding indefinitely, or is it going to collapse back into a singularity as we all sing, is that all there is? And love Peggy Lee. But it shifted. Now what are we looking for? Extrasolar planets, most particularly extrasolar Earths, because while they have the assets in space, they're collecting the data so they can be crunched. Vast amounts of data. Satellites can pump down stuff at unbelievable rates. But going and sifting through it, whoa. It's like mining for gold. Doesn't take a lot of time to dig a shovel full of gravel out of a riverbed, but then you got to put it into a sluice or you got to pan it, and now that's going to take some time. And you're looking for those little nuggets, and that's the case. And so they'll be doing that throughout the period of the tribulation using these fluidic computers that they have underground, and very powerful. Immensely powerful, more than you could imagine. And that's where all the money's going, because what we need to do is we need to get off the planet and we need to go to the stars. Now, our population is going to be greatly reduced, and much of that, by the way, is by intention. All right? The last to know are the first to fall, and so the elites cannot prevent us from coming into awareness, but they can prevent us from reaching consensus. And that's what they're doing, and they're doing a magnificent job because, again, folks, cling to the bliss of ignorance like jealous lovers.
Yes.
The force is with them on this one. I'm sorry. And after all of this, keep in mind that the real elites who run this world are descendants of the Anunnaki. We are bastard children of the Anunnaki. Our species is.
Okay.
Zachariah Sitchin is absolutely right. And what we have is a cadre of probably about 500,000 direct descendants who are running the world. And if they are left in power to continue doing that, then when we do go to space, what we're going to be are Anunnaki stormtroopers. We're going to go out and do exactly what we do here on our own planet. If we want bananas, we go exploit people, and we get our bananas. If we want minerals and whatever, we go dig them out of the earth and destroy habitats left and right, and we don't care. We just abandon it and walk off. We exploit, we steal, we conquest, we enslave. That's the Anunnaki method. On the other hand, if we come through this, if the meek can inherit the earth, then we'll still go to space, but we will go to space as an enlightened spacefaring race. In other words, we'll have that Star Trek future that Gene Roddenberry saw. Gene Roddenberry, the reason why he was so prolific, the reason why the whole Star Trek franchise, when he was alive, resonated with people so deeply, was that he was extracting all of these stories and belief systems directly from the Akashic Records, the Book of Life.
Interesting.
And so this, according to Phyllis Schlemmer, very famous psychic, and she spent a month with him in a study group in a large cottage, and she said when she told him this, he became angry because he was a typical Hollywood guy. I'm the genius, But then once he realized that he, for some reason, was tapping into the Akashic Record and hadn't even known it, then he accepted that and liked it because he knew he'd never run out of stories to tell, and he never did. Always had another wonderful story to tell. But if you look at the vision that he portrayed, all right, that's what really resonated. After he died, the Star Trek franchise started looking more like 23rd century people having 19th century problems.
Right.
And, but when he was alive, wow, it really resonated with his soul. So I see that ability. And the thing here is that on one hand, Nibiru and the passage of the Planet X system, the pole shift, this is going to create chaos, mayhem, and death. But in chaos is opportunity. In the midst of all of this, we as a species are going to become unshackled. This is an interesting term that the guides keep using again and again and again in the book. They don't say we're freed or emancipated. They say we're unshackled. And what the elites are going to do is they've got to figure out a way to get the shackles back on us once the dust settles after the tribulation is over. And that's the reason why they have vast underground stores of foods and medicines, building materials, and so forth. So what they can do is come up and, everyone's on their last leg and exhausted, and they go, now, all you have to do is sign here, okay, and we'll share some of this with you. And a lot of people will just be so hungry, sick, and miserable, they'll just do it and they'll say, I'll do it and then we'll sort it out later. Well, you won't sort it out later because later you'll be back in the shackles again. So we have to understand right now, Denise, we live in a slave world.
Absolutely. We sure do.
So, and then once we go through this tribulation, we're going to have an opportunity as an unshackled species to keep the shackles off. And that, for me, is the be-all and end-all of where I want to invest my efforts. And so if I can help keep the meek healthy, they'll know what to do when the time comes. I just want to help make sure there's enough of them around to do that. And if they don't get sick from viruses, things like that, they will be. At least that's my hope.
I really want to thank you for all of the work that you put into this.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm in it for the species. That's it. Everything, Denise, bottom line, I'm childless, 61, divorced. All I got is an old cat. And he's good company, though. But everything that I do, I look and I think about there will come a day and I will stand before my Creator. And I want to know when that day happens that my Creator is going to look at me and know that warts and all, I kept the faith.
Fantastic. Now, Marshall, can you tell us how our listeners can find you?
Yes, it's YOWUSA.com. That's YOWUSA.com. And for those of you who are new to the subject of Planet X, I produced a series called Planet X 101 just for you. It's a little over 3 hours of video instruction. It's free on YouTube. And you can find that at planetx101.com. And if you go through that series, what you're going to be able to do in about 3 hours is compress 3 years of personal research. And in an afternoon, you're going to come out knowing as much as you would, probably more, than people who have spent years studying the topic. So that is a really good starting point for you.
All right, well, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on to the show.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
I hope to have you back really soon, Marshall.
Oh, I look forward to it. Anytime.
Okay.